All right, I'm ready to start getting the handle scales prepared and ready for attachment. And I've got the blades up to a satin 2000 grit hand finish. So they are all but done. So all I've done is I've decided what side I want to be the outside, and it really doesn't matter with this burl. It's nice any way you look at it, and you can just about flip a coin. One thing I had to take into account is I have an occlusion up in this handle here, this piece of wood, that I want to avoid. So I just drop the knife blade down to where I avoid that inclusion, and then I'll just take and bandsaw this out. And I did belt sand these until they're nice and flat, and that's to make it a little easier when I drill my tang for the pinholes and the thong hole. So I always cut them long. Make sure that I have more than enough sticking out, as you see on that knife. So when I do to finally determine the finished length, all I have to do is dome it and then grind my little bevel on that to finish off the handle. So I'll get the walnut ones in here in just a second. Since these are about ready, I'll take these and bandsaw out this excess, and then I'll clamp them to the knife and then do my standard drilling procedure that I have showed you, many times. Okay, I have the handle scales pretty much prepped up, and as I have showed before, when I do a knife of this style without a metal guard, then we prep the ends of these, and all I did again was I just pinned them face to face after we got the holes drilled, and then put them on an incline work rest and just rotated them until they were flush and they formed that little peak. So they're ready to be epoxied onto the knife, and I have to rough this up with some 100 grit just to give the epoxy a better chance of adhesion. But this is the last step before we finish everything out. So this is how the walnut's going to finish on there, and I think it's going to look pretty nice after everything's contoured in. So I'll come back basically when I'm roughing these out after the epoxy. I've showed epoxying pins and handle scales on so many times, so I will come back when the epoxy is set and we're grinding these things out to finish form. You'll see them again at that point. Okay, I have the knives in epoxy now, and they've been in epoxy for a little over an hour. The epoxy is already set up to where it's not going to run and drip, but it's by no means set and ready to work down. But what I wanted to show everybody, a typical set of knife scales are going to be in the neighborhood of about 1.5 inches wide by about 5 inches long by about 1/4 inch thick, something like that. And you can buy prepared wood scales from just any knife making supply that you find, and they're rather expensive, especially when you take shipping into account. So what I've always tried to do was be as economical in the shop as I could. So what I've done from knife number one is I've always milled my own wood. And when I lived in Tennessee and made knives, there was a lumber mill that backed up on the backside of my property. They would let me go over and fish through what they call their coal lumber. And a coal is anything, because they just milled straight, smooth furniture lumber, and a coal is any burl or nut or anything like that's going to make a board warp. And they would mark that, cut that piece off, and throw it over, and that's what they'd use to fire their kilns. But they used to let me dig through that, and a lot of my handles from back in that day came from that coal pack. And I mean, sometimes I'd just find one nice big chunk of burl. The guy would just say, throw it in your truck, you can have that. And then you go home and you start milling. Well, I don't live next to a lumber mill anymore, but I do live relatively close to a woodcraft store. So I go in there and I start fishing through their shelves, and they had this stuff on their shelves just throughout the store, and this is a maple burl. And I don't know how many knife handles are in this block, but when you figure that a set of scales is going to run 1.5 by 5 by 1/4 thick, you can see there's a lot of knife handles in this block if I take my time and I mill this stuff out and try to conserve as much wood as I can. So I like to have the prettiest figure facing out to where you can see it. So what I would do with this is I would saw this down into an 1.5 inch wide block, you know, being a little heavy, and then start slicing it this way into heavy 1/4 inch pieces that I can belt sand flat and get the saw marks off of. And you know, it just it enables you to be economical. Instead of taking this whole chunk and putting it on a wood lathe and scooping out 90% of it until you have a nice bowl, and turning something nice like this into a pile of shavings. I've always gotten my woods this way, whether it's this or this is what's left of a walnut burl block that was similar in size. But yeah, you just try to do that. You can get pieces of steel from knife manufacturers that are just long enough to make, you know, one knife. And you know, there again, I try to save money. I buy them in 3-foot lengths, or even 4-foot lengths if I can find someone selling that. But you do save money when you buy somewhat in bulk. So I just wanted to throw this in there about woods and sourcing them. And if you want to get into knife making, save yourself some of the cost and consider going to a place like Woodcraft. And if you're not close to a Woodcraft, well, you know, they do sell these mail order, so, and they'll pick a nice one out for you if you ask for it, and you'll get something that you can use. You just have to have a bandsaw and just a good eye for following a line. That's about it. So we'll come back when these are out of these clamps and getting finished down, and then we're going to logo, make sheaths, and get them sharpened, and then they're going to Tennessee. Okay, I've taken the knives out of the clamps, and I walked over to the belt sander, and I got all the rough and the excess off, and I just have them blocked out, more or less. And I just do that until I see steel all around, and I've got my surfaces flat. So the next thing I do is I just, well, here's our example knife, and you can see the contours that I put into the handle. We're going to be doing a similar thing to these knives. So at this point, what I do is I just kind of eyeball how thick I've left everything all around the edges. I'm just going to kind of match that. So these have a lot of thickness to lose. So I'm just going to give myself some pencil lines for reference. And I'll be working these down with a brand new and very rough ceramic belt. And the idea is you want to take this stuff down as fast as you can, but also using a rough belt and slow belt speed. You don't want to build up any heat, especially when you're grinding against these steel pins. The last thing you want to do is heat the epoxy up to where it wants to slip. And two, you don't want to see any burned wood around these pins. And if you do it too aggressively, that's exactly what you're going to get. So we just take our time, and with a rough belt, it does a pretty good job. So I'm just doing some blocking out so I can hog off this wood down to where I can start getting kind of fine-tuned on it. So I'm leaving it thicker back here on the butt, and then from here to here, it's just going to be just a slow kind of taper. I want the fattest part of the handle, other than up here at the very butt. I want it right in here, in this area, and there's going to be that hollow right in here, going just and stopping at a little flare out right here on the very edge. So we're going to walk over there and get these started, and I'll show you little shots of these as they progress. Okay, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm speaking through a respirator. Just got them rough shaped down. This is obviously the walnut one, and
Here is the maple. Just at this point, we just start rounding out some of these radiuses here. And we haven't rounded out the back yet, but that is about as far as we're going to go with that rough belt. Then I'm going to step up to the grits, and I'm going to finish with about 320, and then I'll pull them off the machine, and I go to hand contouring. And then we'll get them into final finish. I'm getting ready to put my wheel attachment on there so I can grind this hollow on each side back here where your little finger needs to grip the knife. So we're going to do that next.
And I have the handles contoured now and brought up to about a 400 grit hand sand. And typically what I would do, if I weren't doing anything else, I would take these up to about 1,000 to 1,200. Then I'd run over there and put a buff on them, just with white rouge, and buff that treatment, that epoxy treatment that's already in the wood, but I'm doing an additional epoxy top coat on this. So this is at 400 grit is where I want to start that. I'm getting ready to get started putting this Max CLR coat on the handles, and I have a set of 3 kitchen knives here that I've been working on, and I decided to put the maple handles on that, so I'm going to see how it works on these too. So before I begin, I'm just going to take a little bit of Johnson's paste wax, and I'm just going to carefully trace it right here where I don't want to have to fight the epoxy off the metal. I might get some on there, but with this on as a release agent, it'll just flake off. I can use like a piece of wood, like a wooden chisel, so to speak, to get it off there. Just making sure not to get any on the handle itself. I'm just going right up to the edge and just giving that a little smear, and that's all it takes. So I'm just going to work my way down and do all of these, and then I'll apply the clear coat. The wax on all the knives. This is called the ricasso area of a knife. So that's where I put the wax. Not worried about it on here because that's going to be fine sanded. I just don't want to have to get into that little nook and cranny. So we're going to put 2 parts of this. I don't want to mix up too much. I'm just doing a thin coat on everything, and 1 part of this. There we go, and I put a much bigger hole in this tip. And supposedly this stuff works excellently as an adhesive, and before I even think about using it on my knives to adhere the handle scales to the steel, I'll try it on a test piece, and I'll do a shear test and some other things just to make sure it's holding up to its claims. So now you should have a shop full of these popsicle sticks. Alright, I think I've gotten everything on that one for the first coat. I'm just brushing out any excess that I see, and then we're going to set this aside. Let that air dry, and then we'll work our way down the line here. Now this is the one I was wanting to see. These have been buffed and then cleaned with lacquer thinner to take off any wax in the buffing compound. But this is what I wanted to see. See, once you put something on there that transmits light, you really get to see the details of the grain. I don't know if you can see it in the glare from the light. I'm going to get all this on here before I dress and countersink that lanyard hole. Just making sure we've got full coverage. 90% of this is going to get sanded off anyway. Wood is my handle material of choice, hands down. So I want to do everything I can to make sure that these handles and the finishes I put on them are durable. All right. See you in a few hours. Okay, I've skipped ahead to the end here. As I said earlier in the video, time's kind of the essence here, and it takes a little bit of time to sit there and edit video and try to mix that in with the build. And in this case, the build did come first because we need to get these to Tennessee before Thanksgiving, which is this coming Thursday, and it's Friday right now, so it's 6 days away. So if I get these in the mail, pretty sure I'll have them down to them by Thanksgiving Day. But they turned out nicely. The epoxy coat, I like it. It buffs up really nice, if you can tell. And we went ahead and put the logos on the knife, and we weaved, little lanyards for them. As you see down here, we already made sheaths. So these are ready to ship. They're sharpened. They got a really nice edge on them, so they're ready to go deer hunting. I can show you the maple handled one now. And the wood's just, that coat and then a nice buff really brought out the grain. So I think Kent will be happy with these two knives, and I like them too. It's this is very similar to the very first hunting knife that I made for me that I still have. So we'll wait and see, get a field report, and hopefully his boys can take these out this season and put them to use. So anyway, guys, in my other knife videos, I have gotten more detailed about the different steps, and I know I didn't in this one. But if anybody out there wants to see the step-by-step process where I go into perhaps too much detail, then just skip back through some of my videos and you'll see one after another video series where I cover all the steps. But again, wanted to get these finished up and mailed, so I have my mailing tube ready to fill. So I'm going to package these up real nicely, take them down, and have the post office weigh them. And the post office is just a couple blocks over from here. And then I will shoot him the total amount. We'll do the deal, and these will be Tennessee bound. So thank you, guys, and thank you, Kent. I appreciate the patronage, and good luck to your boys this year when they take them out into the field. And thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.